loud and it's recording.
All right.
And you know, let me just share with you, because you don't know this, Masi, nor Whitney or Connie, but in 1999, I was invited by the Ford Foundation to give a presentation at the, I can't remember if it was the first or second annual International Militarism and Education Conference at the University of Tel Aviv. And I remember when I went through the hallway, there was a foyer with all kinds of military paraphernalia, including kindergarten underwear that was camouflaged, and all kinds of toys about being a soldier. And then, of course, I gave my keynote about the concept of war and pre-contact indigenous cultures and the absence of it in most pre-contact. About 78% of all indigenous cultures meet the criteria of what a peaceful society is. But anyway, I learned from the subsequent presentations about the horrors that were being perpetrated with the occupation of Palestine, the West Bank, of Ramallah, Gaza. And I felt so ignorant that I had not known these details. So I said, I've got to go over. I've got to go and see this. Well, you couldn't. I mean, you could. That was when there was curfews and somebody without all the pass. So I said, I'm going to go one way or the other to Hagith Zor. She was the faculty member. So she got someone who was Palestinian, who was had permits to go back and forth. And they put me in the back of the trunk and I snuck over. And while I was there, and I won't, you know, the experiences were unbelievable. I interviewed a 15-year-old girl who was training to be a suicide bomber. I interviewed people that had been put in what's called zimzammers and had cigarettes put on into their backs, and on and on and on. But what I'll conclude with, because this is really all about what Dr. Kamsia can say to us, because his experience is so amazing. At the very end, I was in a bombed out building, not 100 yards from a beautiful, homes that the Israeli citizens had built. And I was in a place that was just horrible in comparison. Bombed out still, a young 16-year-old in a rickety wheelchair who had a rubber bullet lodged in his spine for having thrown a rock at a tank. And a woman who was sitting with her black shawl on, asking her other son to go and get the keys. And they brought back a TV tray that had paperwork, documents, and a whole bunch of keys on it. And apparently they had lost their business and their property for not having waited in line long enough, something like that. I'm going back over 40 years. But the last thing I said to her, so what are your people going to do? And she said, not knowing that I was an indigenous man, she said, I don't know, but we're not going to wind up like the American red man on a reservation. And I'll never forget that sentence and what it meant. And so I followed your work carefully over the years, Masin, and I'm so honored for you to be able to share on this video for students and other people that I'll be able to share your story with from a more personal level. So.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I will try to be fairly brief, and maybe then we can have a discussion and see what you all are interested in hearing more about these things. Just by way of background, I was born here in the shepherd's field, where according to biblical tradition, the shepherds heard the angels sing, went up to Bethlehem where Jesus was born. My family is Palestinian Christian family, tracing back ancestry to the native Canaanitic people here. And of course, as you know, this is a very important part of the world for three major religions and also geopolitically and so forth. I won't talk too much about the political structure of the world unless you want me to talk about some of these things. But I finished my bachelor degree here, and then I went to the US for master's and PhD. And then I did medical genetics training, and then I came back to Palestine in 2008. And we set up laboratories for clinical genetics and then a museum of natural history. And if you're wondering, the picture is on the right. Me being arrested in one case, you can see the Israeli knee on my neck. That's a technique they taught to American police, by the way. We'll come back to that in a minute. But this is geographically a very important part of the world where even birds migrate back and forth from Africa through Palestine. Also, humans migrated out of Africa, as you know, to the rest of the world through Palestine. So actually, your ancestors are Palestinians. It's just that some of us went on further after leaving Africa. This is also an important part because it's a fertile crescent where humans first developed agriculture, where we first domesticated plants like wheat and barley and lentils and chickpeas and dates and pistachios and so on, and also goats and sheep. In fact, Jericho is like the oldest continuously inhabited town on earth, 11,500 years that it's been inhabited. There is a political situation. And today, we, the Palestinians, have been squeezed into 8.3% of the land. 7.5 million Palestinians are refugees or displaced people out of a total population of 13 million. And the rest of us who are not refugees, like my family, are in Bethlehem, one of the ghettos or Bantustans or reservations, if you want to call it. That's left for us. 8.3% of the land that's left for the native indigenous Palestinians is actually worse than apartheid in South Africa, where the blacks were relegated to 11.5% of the land of South Africa. And of course, this amount of land left for us continues to shrink every year, every decade. The map on the top, actually shrinking Palestine, was inspired to be drawn by my son when he was in the US in middle school and was reading a book about Native Americans and noticed a shrinking map of the US, which you see at the bottom. And he asked me, well, Dad, isn't this what happened to your country? And I said, no, son, this is what happened to your country. He said, well, shouldn't we draw a map like this? I said, yeah, shouldn't you draw a map like this? Go ahead. So he drew it, and that's been used a lot nowadays. Even Mahmoud Abbas used it in his speech at the United Nations. Of course, this is this system here where you create these systems is colonialism. That's by definition what colonialism is. Settler colonialism is very familiar to all of you and certainly familiar around the world because just about every country on earth suffered from it. Even countries we don't think of as having suffered from it. I was in Switzerland, for example, and of course, there's Italian-speaking region of Switzerland, a remnant of the Roman, colonization and so forth. The settler colonialism has many symptoms, and I don't want to waste your time by speaking about all the symptoms, but just as an example, water allocation, water is taken from us, and basically For example, 91% of the water in the West Bank is taken by Israeli colonial settlers, and we get less than what the World Health Organization recommends for healthy living. There are places like Gaza, which are even worse than the West Bank. Gaza is 2 million people living in a small semi-arid region, and Israel besieges it on all sides, but also there's 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. About 2/3 of them are refugees from 1948, and half of them are children. And there's literally no food and no security in any sense. They're not even allowed to fish. Just 2 days ago, 3 fishermen were killed by, ironically, the Egyptian Navy, which is collaborating with Israel to blockade and starve Gaza to death. Gaza is a genocide that's happening as we speak. And the reason it's happening is because there's gas fields off of Gaza that you can see on the map on the top that Israel wants to control. And so that's why Gaza is besieged. Now, the diagnosis, as I said, is settler colonialism. And settler colonialism, when you think about it, what is settler colonialism? Like happened in North America when the Europeans came to North America, it has a lot of ramifications, a lot of aspects for the native people. In our case, for example, over 100,000 natives have been killed, over 800,000 have been injured, and over 1 million of us have been detained or imprisoned. And Israel is the only country in this 21st century that imprisons children even 12 years old, 11 years old, and so forth. As I said, when you think about this in terms of globally, I mean, the reason you have militarized police in the US is this was an intentional program. Much of these militarized police are trained by Israeli security services. And they train them not just on things like putting their knees on the necks of black people, and just like the Israeli soldiers do on us. As I said, there's a picture of me with that knee on the neck. But they train them in racism, basically. They train them in dehumanizing the non-whites, if you want, or the non-chosen people. And this is a classic program for serving the elites in the world that goes on around the world, and there are people that are engaged in it who are profiting from it. And we have to remember this is always about money. If you want more details about this, you can look at the website deadlyexchange.org about the Israeli-American forces, exchanges, police forces, etc. Now,
Masim, tell us one more time that website.
Deadlyexchange.org, it's at the bottom. You can see the screen, right? The shared screen, everybody?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So anyways, I mean, the colonial systems, of course, is about looting, is about stealing, about destroying. And when white European settlers in North America killed 2 million buffaloes, you have to make the right diagnosis about these things. You cannot say, well, it's a religious conflict, or it's something else, or it's violence, or it's terrorism, or it's this, or it's that. No, you have to identify the underlying cause, which is settler colonialism, which has many symptoms. One of them is this environmental destruction, like killing 2 million buffaloes. In the case of Israel, for example, when it was created and destroyed 530 Palestinian villages and towns, which you see on the map on the right in 1948, removing the largest ethnic cleansing after World War II was in Palestine and still remains. Palestinian refugees still remain the largest refugee population on earth, certainly larger than the more recent waves of refugees from Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and those places that were attacked to serve Israeli interests. But anyway, the bottom line, as I said, is, I can spend hours and hours telling you about issues like bombing power plants, encircling whole cities like Qalqilia here with the wall that made the city basically an open air prison and so forth. Bantustanization of Palestine, also things like draining the wetlands of the Hula area in the north that made 119 species disappear. And of course, Palestinians in those areas were all removed. Or the diversion of the water from the Jordan Valley from Lake Tiberias to the west that drained up the Jordan Valley and caused the shrinking of the Dead Sea, which is actually a lake, not a sea. But anyways, desertification that's spreading. And now to replenish the Dead Sea, so to speak, the big mega project that Israel is developing with the help, with the US basically pushing Jordan to join in and actually building the canal on the Jordanian side, is a canal from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, which will have hydroelectric power plants, desalination, and then dumping the sludge that's left in the Dead Sea. This is devastating for the environment. And the reason, by the way, they built it on the Jordanian side the 15 to $20 billion cost of it will be a loan to Jordan, and Jordan will be responsible for paying that debt. Of course, they cannot pay that debt. So Jordan will be forever enslaved by Israel and the US. That's how they do a lot of these kind of mega projects in third world countries. It's a mechanism that the US uses, utilizing the World Bank and the IMF to basically control countries and make them forever in servitude. Other kinds of environmental effects of colonization is things like that, where you see here the hill called Jabal Abu Ghnaim, which is just behind me, actually. If it was daytime, you would see it from that window there. But anyways, it's a hill that was forested in 1997, and then it becomes a concrete jungle. And as an Israeli colony, my relatives actually own some land there that was taken. So it causes environmental devastation, it causes destruction of people's lives, decline in vertebrate biodiversity. For example, me and my students and others did some work to show these things. We also do studies on basically Israeli dumping toxic waste on us as native people. They put their most destructive, industrial settlements near Palestinian villages, dumping waste that causes DNA damage and chromosome breaks, increase in cancer rates, congenital birth defects, and infertility in those areas. We also have other challenges, of course, including climate change, which is coming at us with a vengeance. We, of course, now, like the rest of the world, are suffering from coronavirus, and it's as a pandemic. Palestine actually has a lot of cases of the pandemic, and the worst thing to imagine is that you cannot have social or physical distancing when you are in refugee camps, or in Gaza, for example, which has, as I mentioned, 2/3 of the population are refugees, with a density of about 6,000 to 7,000 people per square kilometer. This is a horrible situation where you cannot really have distancing, and you cannot have an issue. There's also about 6,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. They cannot distance in crowded jail conditions. These are political prisoners, basically. You know, of course, other countries suffer from this, and you know, we have situations of hospitalization problems. As you know, in every country, there's discrimination, racism. Here's, for example, in Britain, you can see hospitalizations and deaths also of, you know, the white British population versus the non-white British population, and there's huge differences. In Brazil, indigenous people, for example, are most affected by the COVID-19. The same for us here. You know, we have limited medical facilities. We have a blockade basically on us. Even medical supplies are not allowed in. And testing kits, 100 testing kits were held at the bridge for 3 months, and they went bad, and so we lost that. And now Palestinian health hospitals, they say we have enough testing kits left for just a few more days, and then we will have no more testing kits. So I shudder to think of where we are heading with this pandemic. Double whammy of pandemic and colonization, if you want. Again, I could talk endlessly about this, and I'm happy to answer questions about them, but I don't want to depress you too much. So I want to tell you a little bit more positive issues of what we are doing as Native people to protect ourselves and do other things. I and my wife started an institute called Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, which has a vision of sustainable human and natural communities, and we do research, education, conservation. Our motto in this institute is respect for ourselves, that we can change our own circumstances despite all these obstacles. Respect for others, regardless of their religion or background, and respect for nature. This is our motto, basically, and we fall under the missions that the UN set as Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We try to implement them on the ground, of course, with partnership from various groups abroad and local groups, including the Environmental Quality Authority, NGOs, schools, education institutions like universities and schools. You know, that's what we do. An example of this is a project we did for biodiversity conservation community development in a valley called Al-Makhrur. This is a rich valley, rich in biodiversity, but also rich in cultural and agricultural heritage. It's actually designated a World Heritage Site because of its Canaanitic terracing of the land that goes back thousands of years, and that the people continued to inhabit and cultivate this land for thousands of years uninterrupted. We work with school children, for example, on recycling trash and paper and things like that to make gifts from these, even in difficult circumstances. We do a lot of work with school students, etc. We have a museum of natural history. We have done a lot of work. I am happy to share with you. You can go to the website palestinenature.org to see some of our accomplishments. We do a lot of research. We publish about 2 papers a month in various areas of like biodiversity, like genotoxicity, like human rights, colonial, anti-colonial struggles, etc. We have also engaged in education and conservation of protected areas and protecting our own areas and recycling and all of this. And we have keys to our success, as you see here. I won't go through them, but you can imagine. We even started a group called Palestine Action for the Planet to work on environmental issues. We are part of a network around the world, Extinction Rebellion and others. And we try to promote respect for our environment, respect for Mother Earth, etc. In order to help us, you can also join the struggle. We have a movement that started here many years ago, a BDS movement, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, just like we did with South Africa. Under apartheid, we joined in a struggle that's global struggle for freedom. And we encourage people to engage with us in BDS, to work on their media, to lobby their governments that empower Israel and empower apartheid. This is our website, palestinenature.org, and you can email me at the email info@palestinenature.org, and I'm happy to discuss with you. I wanted the presentation to be brief so that we can have plenty of time for, probing questions, discussions, ideas and thoughts and so forth. And I would be happy to discuss in more detail about any of the issues that I mentioned or any other issues that you have.
Well, Dr. Kumste, I just can't imagine a more powerful, short, concise explanation of colonizing, of the ability to care for the larger Earth, Mother Earth, no matter how difficult your own life is, and the positive contributions your research has done in addition to and without respite from your important activism. I've got questions that I want to ask, but I want to let our guests ask them first, and we'll just kind of go down the line. Just unmute yourself, and we'll start with Whitney. So Whitney, just unmute yourself. There you go.
I actually don't have any questions. I'm going to defer to somebody else. It was a fantastic presentation. I'd like to just keep listening.
Okay, so who's next? Akane?
I have a question. I just haven't formulated it yet.
Okay, well, you need to think about it and come back in. Super. And I'm just going to go down the list. Alicia.
I guess I just want to say that I am, I've heard about police officers in America being trained in Israel, learning those tactics in Israel, and showing the picture of George Floyd, and then showing that same tactic, with an individual around the world, that same tactic being used by the Israeli occupying forces, really brought it home to me to hear it, but then to see it, it's to see the exact same thing. It makes me so angry. It just makes me so angry. And I wrote down your email because I've also read about just the struggles that children in Palestine are having as far as getting to school, and how their educational lives have really been interrupted. And I guess I do want to send you an email to just find out about how I could do something to get involved, because I guess for me, as an educator, yes, I'm concerned about education issues in children in the US, but I also feel like for myself, if I say that I'm concerned about children, I need to be concerned about children around the world. So I definitely will be emailing you just to find out if there's, you know, even if it's small, just something that I can do to just get more involved. So thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I'd love to get the emails of everybody here. You can either email me or you can put your email in the chat box if you like, and we'll stay in touch. I think, you know, if there is a message from our conversation, it should be how connected our struggles are. That, you know, I was invited one time to speak to a group of people in Mumbai, India. You know, people who are suffering significantly from racism. You know, they call them the lower caste, the untouchables, so to speak. Hundreds of people were there attending, and you know, I kind of knew the answer, but I asked one of the leaders when I was on the panel to respond to it. You know, I said, you know, there are like 1 million people on the streets in Mumbai without a home. And why are you concerned about Palestine? And his answer, which I kind of predicted, I wanted the audience to hear, was, well, look who's our enemies. Look at who's the best friend of Modi, the Prime Minister of India, that racist bigot that's worse than Trump and Netanyahu, maybe. He says his best buddies are Trump and Netanyahu. The enemy is the same. The enemy is those people who are profiting, making money off of the misery of literally millions and millions of people, and literally getting rich off of it. And so, yes, we are right to get angry, but we also need to think about how we can put our heads together. After all, we are, you know, they say the 99%, but actually it's more like 99.99% of the population who these people are taking advantage of and pitting us against each other and using fear tactics to make poor white people kill poor black people and so forth. You know, that's the enemy, and we need to always keep our eyes on the ball and work on this. I am actually very optimistic that we are in the beginning, if not the middle of a global awakening, and that this awakening will eventually change things dramatically. I can talk more about that issue of optimism if you want, and hope. But I'm optimistic, and I work. I'm a full-time volunteer here 7 days a week because I really believe in what we need to do. And I hope more and more people join us, and I'm seeing more and more people joining.
I'd like to close when we do close, and you saying a few more words about that optimism, because it's difficult for many of my students to have it, and to hear it from you, I think it would be powerful. Alicia, I was just, you know, wanted to ask you that with your desire to help understand and contribute to what's happening in Palestine, but with the connection that you've recognized, how do you think it would help your students for them to know about it?
I think it's important to communicate that, like it was just said, we're all connected. We are all connected. You know, in the U.S., it's, you know, easy to think that our problems are just our problems, and, you know, just kind of you know, and we don't hear about it in the media. We don't, you know, the media is selective in terms of what they say, and, you know, we hear a very slanted version of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. You know, it's apartheid. It's apartheid, and, you know, I think children need to understand what is happening to other children in the world, to other people in the world, and to understand their connection to other people in the world. And I guess for me, I also just want to better understand, like with pressure put on the South African government, you know, companies divested and eventually apartheid, you know, was dismantled, as you know, as we've been told. I don't understand why this, you know, apartheid in Palestine, why is that still happening?
So Mahseen, can you talk a little bit about the issue in the United States that she just raised about it's illegal in every state, I think 21 states right now, if you were a federal employee and you don't buy a particular brand of pickles, you lose your job. Would you tell everybody about that a little bit and how important?
Yeah, I mean, the difference, and this goes to what Alicia said about why in South Africa we succeeded, and here we are still hanging in the, 2020, and we still have the last unresolved anti-colonial struggle that is kept as an apartheid system. Why is it still here? And when you think about it, I mean, part of it is that there was not a very strong pro-apartheid lobby in the US that was pushing for maintaining apartheid. The white Afrikaner movement did not have the wherewithals or the networking or the amount of money globally that the Zionist movement has to influence public opinion and to lobby and make sure that now you can see even Trump and Biden are vying, speaking out for who is more pro-Israel, basically. That's a competition. And that relates directly to this lobby. This is one part. But again, I don't want to emphasize all the negative things. So let me answer your question about optimism. First, regarding Palestine locally, and then I'll speak globally. But regarding Palestine has always been multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society for thousands of years. We have never had a problem in believing in diversity and the strength of diversity. And I think diversity is actually strengths for societies, and also as it is a strength for the ecosystem in nature. When you see a forest that has many species of animals and plants, you know that that's a healthier forest than if you see a forest that's dominated by one species or one tree or something. So diversity is strength, and Palestine has always had diversity. Palestine has always welcomed immigrants. For example, Armenians came here, and there's even an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. They were welcomed, and they become native like us after a few years. I speak Arabic, and they integrate with the local population. Russian Jews, after the pogroms in Russia, came here, and they integrated. We had no problem. We do have a problem with somebody who comes to us and says, nice diversity you have, nice harmony between you and nature, but we don't like that. We want everything changed so that we create whatever state is in their mind. In this case, a Jewish state that's Europeanized, whatever. So obviously we reject these things. So one source of my optimism relates to our own history and the fact that all previous attempts to make Palestine monolithic have failed. For example, the Crusaders, who tried to make it Catholic, if you want, have failed. And we, even Palestinian Christians, by the way, fought with the Muslims against the Crusaders because, not because we hate Christianity. As I said, some of us are Christian. It's because we disapprove of a monolithic society. Now, if you think about that as one aspect of optimism derives from history, another is to look at outcome of all other colonial, anti-colonial struggles. And colonial, anti-colonial struggles end in one of three possible scenarios. There's no fourth scenario. The first scenario is like what happened in Algeria, where 1 million French had to pack their bags and go to France. I don't say back to France because some of them were 7, 8 generations in Algeria. It was very traumatic for them. And this, if you want to call it a win for the natives, I'm not sure it's a win because some 2 to 3 million Algerians were killed in the struggle, so essentially a genocide. But that's one possible scenario that could be possible, is an Algerian model, if you want. A second scenario for colonial, anti-colonial struggles is genocide, outright genocide of the natives, leaving very few of them. This happened in Australia and happened in the US, of course, to a large extent. And this is also not a very nice outcome. And I don't say none of these three outcomes are nice or pleasant, if you want, because once you get that disease of colonialism, like cancer or anything else, you are not going to recover 100% from it. The scenario 1 and 2 are rare, by the way. The third scenario, which is the most common scenario around the world, is basically found in like 150 countries, which is basically a post-colonial situation where the country is inhabited by descendants of the colonized and the colonizers living together. Not beautifully, of course, and not completely in harmony, but you can see this in most of the world, like South America, Central America, Caribbean islands, Cuba, etc. In North America, like Mexico and Canada. In Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, where my wife is from. All these countries that, descendants of colonizers and colonized are going about their lives in a post-colonial structure. These are the three scenarios. Just as a medical person, I would say, on a probability basis alone, we will end up with that third scenario in Palestine, and we need to work for it because scenario number 1 and scenario number 2 are certainly not very pleasant for anybody. So that's where we are going. That's another source of my optimism, is again looking at history and understanding a bit of history. My third, I guess, reason for optimism is because I don't think we have a choice. As a species, we have two choices. We either go extinct with nuclear war and climate change and other things that are happening, or we learn to live together. As Martin Luther King said, we can either die together as fools or live together as fellow human beings. There's basically no third choice. So it's not a matter of choice for us. And we must get our act together. And so hope for me is not the same as optimism, of course. If you ask me as a scientist, what's the chances for humans as a species to make it? I would say it's about 50-50. But hope is something different. Hope is you want to work for what's right, and of course you always hope that the good scenario will develop.
So Mohsin, and your third option, which you say is, most of the colonized countries in the world, would you break that down? Or would you, think it would be worth looking at breaking that down into different levels? For example, we look at New Zealand is certainly colonized in the way that you say, but they have made significant, let's call them compromises with the indigenous peoples, to where now the indigenous languages are literally required in the schools. Laws have been passed to make rivers persons, like we do with corporations in the United States, things that would not be part of the Eurocentric colonial mind. And so like in the United States, my brothers and sisters are working towards sovereignty, since legally we're halfway there. Of course, it's a farce, but we're not interested in the kind of assimilation that you're referring to. But
well, I'm
we can
not
live
fully,
together without that. So you get my point.
Yeah, I know, I understand your point. But if you think about all these countries I mentioned, like all of South America, like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and also in Mexico and Cuba and all of this, you have not only descendants of the colonized and descendants of the colonizers, you also have descendants of the slaves who were brought to those countries. And they have to live in these countries together. Now, as I said, it's not kumbaya kind of living. It's they still have to work on a lot of issues, and each country has its own issues. So New Zealand certainly is different in the kinds of internal struggles that they are facing as compared to, for example, Brazil, where you have a right-wing nutcase who's willing to burn the Amazon so that his buddies can get very rich. So every country has its own unique challenges. But as a scenario, what I'm talking about is a model of one country that will have to work through these problems. This is the third model, basically. It's not a uniform model, certainly from country to country. For example, I was active in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, although marginally through BDS and so forth. And I went to South Africa after it was freed from apartheid. And I was very disappointed. I used to think of Nelson Mandela as a hero. And I was very, very disappointed when I went to South Africa, because there's still economic apartheid there. And actually, the Soweto areas and areas like that are even worse than they were before apartheid. So certainly this was not an outcome that I had hoped for or that I have worked for, but it has opened up, the one person, one vote situation in South Africa certainly opened up the possibilities of economic changes and post-apartheid era, economic justice, environmental justice, other things. And people, my friends there and the unions and others are working very, very hard on these issues with the help of some whites and with the opposition of some other people. And so, the struggle continues, la luta continua, as they say. It is not finished, so to speak. We don't have, like Fukuyama said, the end of history or something like that. No, our struggles will continue, but I'm talking about in terms of a model of one country where all people stay together and then struggle on these other issues. This is the third scenario. There's no fourth scenario. South Africa tried to do it with the system of Bantustans. They call them independent states. Israel is trying to do it with the help of Trump by creating Bantustans for the Palestinians. I guess you should call them Palestines because that was for the Bantu people, and in this case it's for the Palestinian people. So our struggle will continue even if tomorrow Israel is dismantled as a racist, apartheid, genocidal Zionist state. Our struggle will continue.
Sure, as it is with the African American and the American
Yes.
in the United States. So anyone else that wants to ask a question to Dr. Kumsia, jump in.
Go ahead,
Yes,
please.
I'm Linda Dunn, and I got included on this. I'm with Peace Action in Alamance County, and I teach at Elon University. I teach mediation and conflict resolution skills as part of a minor on campus. So I've been doing that many, many years, teaching mediation and conflict resolution skills. But I think part of it, what I wanted to focus on was, I do believe we're on the brink of an awakening. For 30 years, I've been teaching collaboration, and that competitive mindset has just been so difficult to even penetrate in a small way by teaching collaboration. But now it seems like things are just really opening up, and I do think it's a time of awakening. And I don't know how we're going to get through it, but I'm seeing a lot of like international groups coming together to see, you know, and seeing that this is a time of big change in our lives. So I guess maybe speaking more about the awakening, or what you were, I guess, saying, thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the world is changing and empires come and go. I think we're actually at the end of the US empire now, maybe rising of another empire, China or somebody else. But I think, you know, one thing that's for certain is that change is coming. And the question for us, you know, I look at it this way. In the past, with colonialism and genocides and so forth, they were local phenomena. How do I mean by that? When King Leopold in Belgium, for example, went and killed millions of people in Congo, and because they wanted to get their chocolates, you know, it was like a local phenomenon. No, you know, it's okay, millions of people died. Nowadays, you cannot do that anymore. The world is so interconnected, and the development of weapons is such that even primitive, if you want to call them native people, can really cause you a lot of headache as an empire, and can really, I mean, make a huge difference. I mean, I can tell you that you cannot have safety by having concepts of nation states, for example, a concept that's created in Europe in the 19th century when empires dissolved and they had to create a new system. So they came up with the idea of nation states, which in turn, of course, caused discrimination against minorities in Europe, like gypsies and Jews and you know, Catholics in majority Protestant states, or Protestants in majority Catholic states, or whatever. This old system that worked, you know, in the 19th century we're in the 21st century. It cannot work. You know, you have nuclear weapons now found in, you know, at least 8 countries, and nuclear weapons that in a chain reaction could really destroy human life on Earth, taking with it also much of the other life on Earth. So we cannot afford it anymore to have imperialism, colonialism, genocides that's local, and think that they can get away with it. I mean, another reason, perhaps I should add, a fourth reason for my optimism, is that military power has become obsolete, has become useless. And think about, for example, of the US invasion of Iraq, which was done to benefit Israel. It cost the US taxpayers like you and me $3 trillion, cost thousands of American lives and about 1 million Iraqi lives. And what did it accomplish? What did the US get out of invasion of Iraq? You know, it's actually backfired on them, because it strengthened Iran and strengthened forces of resistance in the Arab world, and weakened the allies that we were propping up, the dictators of the Gulf. And also Israel, the apartheid state, was weakened by the invasion of Iraq, even though it was intended to serve Israel. Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 2006, for example, strengthened Hezbollah. Israel's attack on Gaza, killing thousands of Palestinians, you know, bombing refugee camps. What did that accomplish? It strengthened Hamas and strengthened the resistance. So military might is no longer, in my humble opinion, no longer, as Kissinger once said, you know, it's policy by another tool. You know, it doesn't work that way. People need to understand that the new world, we really, again, have those two choices. We either cooperate and make a better world for all of us, or we all die together. It's not a choice of win and lose. You know, it's either win-win or lose-lose.
So with
This
that,
is what's in it for the 21st century.
with that in mind, since our hour is closing, I'd like for you to just maybe answer one question that I have that relates to your last statement. 80% of all the biodiversity on Mother Earth right now is on only about 20% of the landmass. And that landmass, according to the largest study ever done by the United Nations and their extinction rate report, is controlled by those few struggling indigenous cultures who still remember their connection to nature. So how might you characterize the Palestinian work that you're doing with regard to sustainability as a model for bringing this togetherness? In other words, right now we have these outliers like Bolsonaro and Trump that are denying it, and a large number of followers that are also doing so. But do you think that the possibility, you're a little more optimistic with your 50% than I am right now. I'm working to rebuild, whereas you might be working to save. I'm just hoping they'll pick up your book, whoever rebuilds, right? But anyway, so can you give us a sense of how your model and that idea of us focusing on the COVID, you know, no one's focusing on what causes COVID, you know, the deforestation and all that. So help me with that.
Yeah, I'm really very glad you asked this question, because I was going to talk about it actually, and I think it's very, very important. And it's really good to end with it, that we native people around the world have wisdom that's developed by thousands of years of living on the land and living in harmony with the land, that people need to listen to what we say. And I think they are starting to listen, and they're even, you would be surprised, I have even Israelis who come and ask me about what needs to be done to save the environment here from the catastrophe that they have. For example, when they destroyed the Palestinian villages and towns, and they uprooted a lot of the agro-biodiversity that was growing there, and they planted uniform pine trees, European pine trees, and now European pine trees burn, of course, like fuel, you know, and, and we have a lot of fires in the Galilee and other places. So I think we will be listened to more as time goes by. But also I would say it's our responsibility to not only just tell people our wisdom, if you want. I think our responsibility is deeper than that, and it's revolutionary. And I think we really need to organize, we really need to revolt, and we really need to network across the globe. And it's not enough for us Palestinians to resist Israel, or Native Americans to fight for justice, or Black Americans for Black Lives Matter. They really need to understand the connections of all of these things, and we need to build a worldwide movement. I once called it in one of my articles, global intifada, or global uprising, that we have to do. We saw beginnings of it in things like the occupation movement, and of course now in Black Lives Matter and other kinds of movements. I think we can do these things, we can increase those things, and I think we can succeed if we work together to achieve this.
Wow, thank you so much. And I would like to end this by playing a melody on my Lakota flute. That is for you, Masin, and for your people, the Cherokee people, my blood people. You know of the Trail of Tears.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The mothers on that Trail of Tears, with all the horrors, sang a song every night to their infants and their children. And the song talked about, did you see the beautiful animals in the clouds today playing? Did you hear the beautiful sound of the mockingbird as we went by? Did you see when we crossed the brook, the beautiful trout colors? Did you see the grasses dancing, etc.? And so I'm going to play that melody that they sung to their children. And I'd just like everyone to sign off. You don't need to, just close off whenever you want. I'll play it a couple of times. But just allow yourself to feel that if the mothers can remind their children to see the beauty that Mother Earth has given us, in spite of the most horrible acts of mankind, that's got to give us some hope. Muchas gracias for everybody. Thank you. If you email me, I will send everybody the video. Pilama, thank you so much.